Hey gamers, Chris here. This is Treantmonk's Temple, where knowledge is power. This is part 2 of my Trickery guide. What I want to do today is I want to be taking Trickery Cleric, make a level 1 Trickery Cleric, and then level it right up to level 20. That way, together we can see what decisions are optimal decisions at each level and what kind of tactics we might want to do. So this format here, what you're going to see in this part of the video, this will probably be the entirety of what you're going to see for most of my subclass guides. So by all means, let me know what you think. Do you like it? Is there something I should change? The comment section down below, you know I read all the comments. So I'd be happy if you want to let me know if you like it or you don't like it, or if there's something you would like to see different. We are going to be doing a Cleric of Temora. Now, the reason I'm picking Temora is because Temora, number one, she's part of the general Faerun pantheon, which means she's kind of generic to pick. She's good, and I think most characters are good, so it makes sense to worship a good god, and her domain is trickery, and that's basically it. I haven't really come up with an interesting concept here. I'm going to let you guys come up with the interesting concepts. As it is, I am actually doing Trickery Cleric of Temora in a stream that I've recently started, but in that case the DM has instituted a bunch of house rules, and there's really specific campaign stuff, like you can't wear certain armors or you carry around certain weapons. So that character isn't actually a good example for generic mechanical decisions as we level up a character. So I'm going to do a different character. This character is just going to be a Cleric of Temora. I'm thinking maybe a Harper agent, so kind of a spy kind of character. So I am sometimes asked what I use for making my characters. I use D&D Beyond. Just be aware, D&D Beyond is not free. I've bought content on D&D Beyond that allows me to access different books. So I'm going to go into my character builder here and do a standard character. And it comes up Treantmonk's character. Now if I'm going to do a cleric, then I should have a name. I'm not worried about it being overly interesting, so I'm going to call him Bob the Cleric. Alright, there's Bob the Cleric. Am I using homebrew content? No. Am I using Magic the Gathering content? No, I'm not. Nor am I using Eberron content. I will be using feats, and multi-class requirements doesn't matter because I won't be multi-classing. So let's go to race. So when you're playing a cleric, there's one rule to remember. When you're picking race, unless you are rolling for your stats, but if you're using standard array or point buy, the rule is if you pick a race with at least a +1 wisdom modifier, you're fine. If there's a race you want to play and it's got a +1 wisdom modifier, it doesn't matter about the rest. You'll be fine. Go ahead and play that race. That is so much more important than anything else the race can offer that it dwarfs the rest. The rest is not useless, but it's not a big deal. That said, the ones that I think are strongest picks for clerics are, number one, the Aarakocra. The Aarakocra gets a +2 to dexterity, which is good, the +1 to wisdom, which is necessary, and they have flight. And flight is huge, of course. And with a cleric, one of the considerations you're always going to have to make is how am I going to make concentration saves? Because you don't have a constitution proficiency, which means that your concentration save will be based on whatever your constitution is, and that's it. So you want to avoid those saves when you can. Aarakocra can avoid those saves by flying above enemies. They can often then do a Spirit Guardians that will still envelop their enemies while they fly out of their reach. Now, if your enemies are good at ranged combat, they may choose to do that, but if they're not, you may be able to get away without being attacked at all while you're causing all this damage to your enemies. And so that's quite useful, and it makes the Aarakocra really good. Now, be aware that a lot of DMs don't allow Aarakocra, specifically because of the power of flight. I don't allow Aarakocra in my games. So just be aware, you better talk to your DM if you want to play one. But are they good? Yes. So that brings us to the second race I would like to put special call out for its use as a cleric. That's the Hill Dwarf. Hill Dwarfs make fantastic clerics with a +2 to Constitution and a +1 to Wisdom. Those stats are right where you want them to be. You got Dark Vision, which is always useful. With the Dwarf, of course, you have resistances to poison, which is always useful as well. And with the Hill Dwarf, you get +1 to your hit points every level. So that's like an extra +2 Constitution worth of hit points, which is nice as a racial ability. That's really good. And they get, of course, other little dwarven things, which are all right, but just those things alone make the Hill Dwarf specifically, a very good cleric choice. Another race I'm going to point out is the Wood Elf. Wood Elves also make really good trickery clerics. You're going to get Keen Senses, which is going to give you perception ability right away, +2 dexterity, +1 wisdom. That's right where you want it to be. You get the dark vision, which, is, as I mentioned, is useful. And then you get all the little elf stuff. And then as a Wood Elf, there's ability to hide. It's Mask of the Wild. You can attempt to hide even if you're only lightly obscured by foliage, heavy rain, falling snow, mist, and other natural phenomena. And then you get this Fleet of Foot, which gives you 35-foot movement, which is always useful. So it's a good race to pick. Now my Trickery Cleric is a Ghostwise Halfling, the one I'm playing that I'm not leveling up right now. Ghostwise Halfling I think is also really good. +2 to Dexterity, +1 to Wisdom, both those things great. The lucky ability of Halflings I really like because I seem to roll a lot of ones, and it is so lovely when you remember that because you're a Halfling you get to reroll. That's great. Brave gives you advantage on saves versus fear, and Halfling Nimbleness comes up more often than you would think. That's the ability to move through enemy squares. Here it is. You can move through the space of any creature that is of a size larger than yours. So you can move through enemy squares, which allows you additional tactical ability. You can get to the places you need a little bit easier, which is good actually because you have a lower speed, a 25-foot speed. Another thing you can do as a Ghostwise Halfling is you have telepathy. You can speak telepathically to any creature within 30 feet of you. Another kind of race I think is really good at being a cleric, and specifically a trickery cleric, is the Kenku. Kenku I mentioned in part 1 of the video. If you want to play a rogue style trickery cleric without multi-classing to rogue, and you can multi-class with rogue with a trickery cleric, it's not a bad multi-class, but if you want to be the best spellcaster you can, then don't multi-class. But if you still want to cover the rogue skills, you can do so with a Kenku. 2 extra skills that are both thiefy kind of skills. If we look here, you can choose acrobatics, deception, stealth, and sleight of hand. So choose your deception and stealth. You've covered 2 of your basic rogue skills. And then if you take the criminal background or the street urchin background, you're going to get thief tool proficiency and 2 more thiefy kind of skills. Put those all together and you're going to have a basic covering of the rogue skills. No expertise. You're going to have to try to use guidance to cover that to some degree. You're not going to be as good a rogue as a dedicated rogue or a bard who really works on rogue skills. But you can at least get proficiency and cover those skills basically. And with the +2 dexterity, there's a reasonable chance you could even start with a 16 dexterity, which makes you even a little bit better. Now that brings us to the race I'm going to pick. The race I'm going to pick is the best race in the game. That's the Variant Human. And the reason I'm going to pick it is because it's the best race in the game, as I just mentioned. Variant Human is often the best choice regardless of the subclass you choose, because they get that feat at level 1, and that is so powerful. A feat at level 1 makes such a big difference, and with a cleric, as I mentioned, we are going to be concerned about maintaining our concentration. Having a feat at level 1 allows me to mitigate that to some degree, and that is a big deal. Because you get +1 into 2 ability scores that you want, then it doesn't matter what class you're playing. You can pick the ability scores that are useful to you. Plus you get an additional skill and a language. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Human. Going to pick a language. Now this is going to be campaign dependent. You may know based on your campaign what language you might need. For example, there's a certain campaign path where you know that giant is the right choice. And another thing to think about is, what are the other players' languages? Maybe one of the other players has taken something not so common, like Minotaur. So you could take Minotaur too, and then you guys have a secret language that you can share information with. Generally speaking, though, you're usually well off taking, if you don't know what languages to take, go ahead and take languages that are going to come up a lot. Elvish comes up a lot. Dwarvish comes up a lot. Draconic comes up a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and take Draconic. That brings us to our ability score increases. Naturally, the first one has to go to Wisdom. Then our second one, we can choose between Constitution and Dexterity. These are our secondary abilities. So we want our Wisdom to be our highest, and then our Dexterity and Constitution are next. And so it doesn't matter which one you pick, because no matter which one we pick, we're going to end up with a 14 in both of these. So I'm going to go ahead and take Dexterity. Then I'm going to pick a bonus skill. The skill I am going to pick is Perception. Perception is the skill I find comes up more than any other skill in the game, so it is a skill I like to have with pretty much every character I make. And then I'm going to pick a feat. So I'm just going to pull up the feats here. As I mentioned, we want to mitigate concentration saves. And there's a few different ways we can do that. I think these are all good selections for feats, but let's go through what those selections are. The first one is Warcaster. So the big deal here is you have advantage on Constitution saving throws that you make to maintain your concentration on a spell when you take damage. Be aware that there are sometimes you make concentration saves when you don't take damage because you were targeted with a spell like Sleet Storm, or maybe you're on a bumpy cart. So this doesn't necessarily cover you 100% of the time, but taking damage is by far the most common reason you're making concentration saves, and this will turn if you have, say, a 14 Constitution and you're going against a DC of 10, which is pretty much the most common DC you're going to face with a concentration save, then you're looking at normally a 65% chance of success. This would change that to 88% chance of success, so quite a jump. The second ability is you can perform somatic components of spells if your hands are full. Not a problem because we're not going to have our hands full. And then when a hostile creature's movement provokes an attack of opportunity from you, you can cast a spell at them. This sounds really good, but this particular character, I'm not going to recommend that you just jump it right into melee. I'd say stay just out of melee. Now, if an opponent closes with you, you may find yourself in melee, and that's fine, but then they would, again, have to move away from you to provoke that attack of opportunity. Not going to happen a lot. So I don't think that's going to be a big factor. So we're really just talking about this first one. Still useful enough to take this feat, not the feat I'm going to select. The second feat we're going to look at is Resilient. Obviously, Resilient Constitution. This, of course, gives you proficiency in Constitution saves. It also increases your chosen ability score by 1. With this character, the way we're going to be doing abilities, this +1 isn't going to mean anything to us. But if you are in a case where you have an odd Constitution score, this becomes better, of course, because not only are you gaining the proficiency in Constitution saves, but you're also going to increase your bonus to Constitution by 1. Now, in our case, as I said, it would only be the proficiency. And at level 1, that's not a big deal. We're only getting +2. But the thing about Resilient is it scales, right? Because your proficiency bonus goes up eventually to +6. So eventually this would provide us a +6 to Constitution saving throws, which is a big deal. So I probably will take Resilient with this character, but not at level 1. And that gives us our third option, which is Lucky. Lucky isn't specifically for concentration saves, but it gives us 3 dice that we can add or to a roll after we've made that roll. So usually what happens is you're going to take some damage, then your DM is going to ask for a concentration save. You already know what the DC is going to be. It's usually a 10 unless you took a lot of damage. And you know you're going to have a +2 on that roll. So you know before you roll the d20 exactly what you need to roll to succeed. So you can roll the die, and now before you announce whether it's successful or unsuccessful, you can choose to roll another die. So you rolled, it wasn't good enough, so you're going to add another die. It's essentially giving you advantage when you need it. So you're getting that 88% chance of success. And you don't necessarily have to use all 3 of those dice on that. you may not be making 3 concentration saves in a day because you get these 3 points back every day. So if you make, say, 1 concentration save, then you've got 2 extra lucky points. You can use them. You might use them on other saving throws. You might use them on other saving throws anyway, because sometimes those saving throws are so important. Or if you have disadvantage, of course, lucky can give you that super advantage. Particularly useful if you have a disadvantage on a saving throw, because of course you always want to make your saving throws. Now, lucky can potentially run out too. We could use all 3 and then we get hit again and now we don't have another lucky point. But I find most often the 3 points is enough because those 3 points come back after every long rest. So I'm going to go ahead and take lucky, and as it happens, lucky is also an appropriate feat for this character since they are worshipping the goddess of luck. So now let's go to our class. Of course, we're going to choose Cleric. And then our domain, of course, is Trickery. Then we're going to pick 2 proficiencies. Now, because this character is going to be kind of a spy-like character, I do foresee them occasionally being in social situations. They might be using their disguised self and have to pass off something to somebody, or they might just be in regular social situations trying to get information, that kind of thing. So I would like to pick some social skills here. The first social skill I'm going to pick is Insight. Insight is a wisdom skill, which means this is the one social skill where you're actually going to be better at it than somebody who's a cleric or a sorcerer or a warlock. So it's an obvious one to pick. Usually Insight is the roll you make if somebody is lying to you, to know that they're lying to you. The second one I'll take is Persuasion. Persuasion is kind of your general social skill, and it comes up a lot, and having proficiency in it will give us a scaling advantage on that. Now we're going to pick our background, and as I said, I wanted to make this a Harper agent. I also want to make it a spy, so I really have 2 choices here. I could just go ahead and I could take Faction Agent, or I could take the Criminal Spy. And both will actually give me the same skills. I'm going to be looking to get Deception and Stealth. And because a Faction Agent would normally provide you with one of your choice, as well as Insight, because I already have Insight, I have to pick a different skill for that one as well. So I could just pick the 2 skills I want. And of course, Criminal Spy is going to give me Deception and Stealth. The only difference is Criminal Spy is going to give me some tool proficiencies, while the Faction Agent would give me some languages. I think I want the skill proficiencies, so I'm going to take Criminal Spy. And then I get Deception, Stealth, Thieves' Tools, and then I pick a gaming set. I worship a goddess of luck, so naturally I'm going to take dice. So now let's go to our ability scores. There are 3 main generation methods for ability scores. The first is you roll 4d6 6 times, you drop the lowest in each case, and then you assign them where you want them to go. That has so many variables, I can't really give you a lot of advice on that. Put your high score in wisdom, put your next highest in dexterity and constitution. I would probably put them, I think I'd go dexterity a little above constitution if I had to make a choice, and then the rest would be lower. But again, there's so many variables, I can't really talk too much about that. Instead, we've got these other 2 methods, which are the standard array and the point buy. I think point buy is probably the most common method, but still lots of people are using standard array, and I'm going to pick standard array because you can just use a point buy to buy the standard array. So this actually covers everyone who has the standard array and the point buy. So what standard array does is it gives me a 15, a 14, a 13, a 12, a 10, and an 8. I can put them wherever I want. Obviously, the 15 is going to go in wisdom. Now the 8 has to go somewhere, and there's nowhere where I really want to put an 8. Strength and intelligence kind of are the 2 least important stats here. I'm going to go ahead and pick strength just because I don't like the idea of having below a 10 intelligence. But if you want to go the other way around, that would be perfectly fine. If you're playing in a campaign where the DM is making you count up coins and then determine weight versus your encumbrance, you definitely want to be putting the higher score under strength. In most cases, DMs, I find with encumbrance, as long as you your basic stuff is within your encumbrance limit, it's not going to be a problem unless you try to abuse it. So I think 8 will probably do most of us just fine. So then I have the 12. I'm going to put that under Charisma. That's going to give me at least a +1 to my Charisma modifier. That's not a lot, but it's something. And then Dexterity and Constitution, if I remember right, I put my bonus under Dexterity. Let me just verify that. Yes, I put my bonus under Dexterity. So my Dexterity, I'm going to assign the 13. That gives me a 14 or a +2 modifier. And 14 under Constitution, also giving me a +2 modifier. So there we go. We have Wisdom as our most important ability score. It begins with a +3. Then our Constitution and Dexterity are kind of tied for number 2, and they each have a +2 modifier. And then our Charisma we see coming up once in a while for social situations, +1. And then Intelligence is 0 and a -1 Strength. Fortunately, we're not using weapons. So now I'm going to go to the equipment section. Now, I recommend that if you have the option, you roll your gold and then you buy the equipment that suits your character. However, because rolling gold is random and I can't cover all the possibilities there, I'm just going to start with a standard starting equipment. And it's going to give me a mace. I'm never going to use that mace. So I'll just keep the mace and maybe I'll sell it or give it to another party member. And then I have the choice of scale mail or leather armor. And you might think, because this character has stealth, we'll need to take the leather armor to avoid the disadvantage. No, take the disadvantage. You will fail your stealth rolls at first level. That's fine. This is a difference of 3 armor class. You cannot give that up. So we're not going to worry too much about stealth at first level. What we're going to do is, as soon as we can afford a breastplate, or we find appropriate magic armor that doesn't cause us disadvantage on stealth, then we will switch to that armor. But at level 1, starting, get your scale mail. It's going to give us an 18 armor class. And an 18 armor class is a great starting armor class. We'd be all the way down to 15 with leather armor. That's a big drop. It's not worth it. So then we can choose any simple weapon or a light crossbow. I'll take the light crossbow. My cantrips will have a 60-foot range, which is going to be enough most of the time. But at least with the light crossbow, I have an option beyond 60 feet. Now I'm going to have a shield equipped most of the time, so it would be a round or an action, I should say, to unequip that shield so that I could even use that light crossbow. So it's probably not going to come up a lot, but if I'm going into a combat where I know I'm going to be at a long range, I might unequip the shield before the combat and have the light crossbow available. It's okay to have it as a backup. I have a decent dex, so I won't be too bad with the crossbow. Then I can choose a priest pack or an explorer's pack. I generally pick the explorer's pack. Explorer's pack has all those basic things that you kind of want to start with. Then I have a shield and a holy symbol. I'm just going to choose the emblem on the shield. That's generally the one I recommend because then you can use your shield as a spell focus. I may not need that very often. I might just be fine with an amulet that I wear that I reach up to grab when I cast because I'm going to have the free hand anyway. But if I have something in my other hand, like a magical staff or something, then at least I have that option. What I will probably do is, again, once I've got a little bit of money, I'll buy myself a component pouch. A component pouch will cover me off on spells where the component is also consumed. Well, a spell focus does not. So I'm going to click Add Starting Equipment. That'll add it to my character. Then I open up the inventory, and I'm going to say that I will be wearing my scale mail and shield. That way it will calculate my armor class while having those on. So now we're going to pick our spells. So we're going to go over here to spells. We already have Charm Person and Disguise Self. Here's Charm Person. 1 action casting time, 30-foot range, 1 hour duration, and it causes a creature to become charmed and be friendly. I'm not a huge fan of this. Number 1, of course, if they make their save, nothing happens. It's not so good in combat because they have advantage on their saves. And after the hour runs out, they're hostile to you. Still, it has its place. It's certainly useful when you're thinking about trickery. So I'm okay having it on my list. I'm probably not going to cast it a lot. Disguise Self I like a little more. 1 hour duration, and you can make yourself look like somebody else. So if you are trying to get into the fort, you can make yourself look like one of the guards. And then of course, we have a deception skill, so we may be able to bluff our way in, and at least we're well disguised. So now we're going to start at level 0. That's our cantrips. I get to pick 3 cantrips at level 1. The first one, obviously, is Guidance. Guidance is one of the best cantrips in the game. You touch one willing creature. Before the spell ends, the target can roll a d4 and add the number rolled to an ability check of its choice. You can do this on yourself. Very useful. I use it all the time, and you should use it as often as you can. Quite often we know before we're going to make an ability check that we're going to have to make an ability check. You're about to jump across the chasm and you need to make an athletics roll. You can roll the guy, or you can cast the guidance first because you know you have to do it. If I'm going to approach the guard and I'm going to try to bluff my way past him, I can cast the guidance because I know I'm going to be making a deception roll. So again, you can use it a lot, and because it's a cantrip, you can use it as much as you want. So use it all the time. It does use your concentration. That's something to keep in mind. So when we get things like Pass Without Trace, we're not going to be putting a guidance on top of that. Second one I'm going to pick, well, I don't have a weapon in combat, so I'm going to be using cantrips in combat. That means I have 2 options, Sacred Flame or Toll the Dead. Neither of them are terrible, but Toll the Dead is the better of the 2. And the reason it's the better of the 2 is because if you are attacking a creature that is missing any of its hit points, it does d12 damage instead of the d8. Well, Sacred Flame only does d8 damage. Now, each of these do different kinds of damage. They each target a different saving throw. So it might be reasonable to take them both at some point. But at level 1, we can't really afford to have 2 attack cantrips. And Toll the Dead is probably going to be fine. Necrotic damage is not resisted all that often. So this will be good in most combats. And again, that d12 means more damage. Finally, I took a human. That means I'm going to take Light. Light is something I can cast on my shield, means I don't have to carry a torch. I don't want to carry a torch because I'm going to be casting spells. So Light gets around that by lighting up my shield. And the duration is pretty good. 1 hour duration. It's not using my concentration. And it's 20 foot of dim light and 20 foot of bright light. So 40 foot light and 20 foot of it is bright. So now I'm going to choose my first level spells. The first spell I'm going to pick is Bless. Here's Bless. Bless is a great buff at first level. You bless up to 3 creatures of your choice within range. You're going to pick creatures that, or you're going to pick allies that make lots of attack rolls. Whenever that target makes an attack roll or a saving throw before the spell ends, they roll a d4 and add the number rolled. This turns a lot of misses into hits. It adds up. It really does. Now, you may want to include yourself in the Bless, just because if you're making a concentration roll, which you will need to do to maintain the Bless, you will get the d4 added to your concentration roll, which then, of course, improves that 65% chance to around a 75-80% chance. As you can see, I already have my Charmed Person, my Disguised Self, and now I'm going to pick Healing Word. Healing Word, as I mentioned, I think it's overrated, but that doesn't mean I think it's bad. I think Healing Word is a great spell and the perfect spell for you to take at first level with a cleric. The reason I think it's overrated is because I've heard some people ranting about how it's ruining the game because it's so powerful. It's not that powerful. It's good. Bonus action casting, 60-foot range, that's lovely, right? The 60-foot range is the main reason why I would take this over a Cure Wounds spell. It doesn't heal a lot. D4 plus your spellcasting ability modifier, which is Wisdom. So we're looking at a D4 plus 3. That's not bad. At first level, that's a reasonable amount. But the main thing we want this for is if somebody goes down, instead of stabilizing them, we're just going to heal them. Now, because it's a bonus action, at first level, that's really good because the only thing we're really doing that's taking bonus action is this. So this is something we can basically throw on any round unless we cast an actual spell. So if it's the same round we cast a Charmed Person or a Bless or a Disguised Self, then we can't do the Healing Word. Otherwise, we can pretty much do a Healing Word as an extra on our round. That doesn't last. At level 3, that will no longer be the case, and we'll talk more detail about that when we get to level 3. Now I get to pick 2 more prepared spells. The thing is that I only cast 2 spells a day. Am I going to be casting Bless? Yeah, I'll be casting Bless in the big fight. So that'll be 1 spell. And then I'm going to want to keep 1 in reserve in case I need a Healing Word. If somebody goes down and I have no spell slots left, that Healing Word didn't do me a lot of good. So essentially, I'll probably be sticking with cantrips most of the time. Then when the big fight comes, I'm going to be using Bless, and I'm going to save one slot, and if somebody goes down, I'm going to have a healing word for them. And that's really all I've got. I'm first level. So the next two preparations, I'm going to be looking at rituals. And the first ritual I'll take is Detect Magic. Detect Magic, of course, is really useful because when you defeat the bad guy and he's got a bunch of equipment, you want to know if any of them are magic items. So you take your 10 minutes to cast the Detect Magic ritual, and then we can see if any of those items are magical. If nobody else in your party has Detect Magic, it's almost a requirement. The second ritual I'm going to pick, there's actually not a lot of good choices. This might be campaign dependent. I mean, if you're going to be doing the one where you're going through the jungles of Chult, then Purify Food and Drink is a really, really, really good choice. Otherwise, Ceremony is occasionally useful. Detect Poison and Disease is occasionally useful. I think this is maybe thematically appropriate, so it's what I'm going to pick. One way that it's more commonly useful is with potions. Sometimes potions are poison, so you don't want to be sipping a potion if you don't know what it is, but you can do a Detect Poison and Disease ritual, and then any poisons will be identified for you. So we are done our first level character, so let's see what it looks like. Here he is. Here's Bob the Cleric. So we can see Bob the Cleric. We got a +3 Wisdom, which is a requirement, +2 to Constitution and Dexterity, 10 hit points, which is decent, 18 armor class, which is quite good, +2 initiative is fine, 15 passive perception is very nice to have, especially at level 1. That's a good score because, of course, we have our +5 perception, we have our +5 to insight, +3 deception, which is okay, +3 persuasion is okay, +4 to stealth, reasonably good, but we won't be using stealth very much because we have scale mail. So if we can avoid using stealth, we will, because we can't expect to succeed on that with disadvantage. Here's Blessing of the Trickster. As you can see, as an action, you can touch a willing creature other than yourself to give it advantage on dexterity stealth checks for 1 hour until you use this feature again. Here's where I would use it. If there is a rogue in your party, that's a no-brainer, especially once you get to level 2. Level 1, of course, a rogue is going to want to still be good at stealth. You can basically make them good at stealth permanently, right? Because with a 1 hour duration, no concentration, you can have this up all the time, right? Every hour you just redo it, which means that they're basically got permanent advantage. Where it really comes into play, though, is once they're level 2, they're going to get cunning action. That means they're going to occasionally want to hide in combat. And then you have given them advantage on that hide check every round, which means it's almost always going to succeed, which means they are almost always going to be able to attack from hidden, which means they're almost always going to get their sneak attack. And a rogue will love you for that. If there is no rogue in your party, this is good on anybody. I mean, anyone who might make a stealth roll. If you have a bard in your party, they can certainly use this. If you have a ranger in your party, they can certainly use this. You might even want to use this on a pet or a found steed that maybe you're using as a scout, or a familiar that you're using as a scout. There is always going to be some use for this. This is a good ability. This ability gets heavily underrated. Use it all the time. Just keep it up all the time on somebody, because then if you don't do that, you're just wasting it. So what do you do in combat? Well, again, I kind of went over this, but we have 2 spells, 2 spell slots. That's not a lot. So this is what you want to do. You want to save your spell slots. And then when you get into a fight where you think it's the big fight, you're going to start round 1 with a bless. Then you are going to save that other slot, and if somebody goes down, you got a healing word for them. Now, if somebody went down in an earlier fight because you weren't expecting it, maybe you had to use that healing word, so then maybe you won't have a bless at all. Whenever you're not casting a bless spell, then you're probably doing a Toll the Dead. So you're just going to toll the dead, toll the dead, toll the dead. It's not great at level 1. You're not doing a ton with it, but the thing is it gives you something to do. The main thing you've got, the bless is kind of your powerhouse spell, and the healing word, really useful. But the toll the dead then is just allowing you to contribute beyond that. Again, at level 1, you're not going to be doing as much damage as some of the other characters, but when you consider all the misses you turn into hits with bless, if you consider that your damage, and it really is your damage, suddenly that gap closes right away. So now we're going to go ahead and level this guy up. And we are going to go to level 3. So we're skipping a level here. I'm basically going to go every other level, but we'll look at the stuff that we got at level 2 as well. And what we got at level 2 is Invoke Duplicity and our Channel Divinity, which is our Turn Undead ability. Turn Undead is amazing, right? If you are fighting undead and you have a cleric, turn undead. It is better than anything else you're going to be able to do with a Channel Divinity, regardless of what cleric type you are. So let's look at our spells. As you can see, this is the spells we already have prepared. There's quite a bit there, right? A lot more than you're going to see with any other caster. That's because of the domain spells. And as you can see, we've added in Mirror Image and Pass Without Trace. Mirror Image is basically one of the best defensive spells in the game, particularly for a caster that's worried about concentration saves, because Mirror Image will turn 3 hits on you into misses. That's essentially what it does. It may take more than 3 hits to get those 3 to accumulate those 3 misses, because you have to make a roll. The first roll isn't that hard. It's just a 6. The second time you will need an 8, and the third time you will need an 11. But if you're attacked enough, you will get to use all 3 of them, and then that will turn 3 hits into 3 misses. That means 3 concentration saves you didn't have to make. That said, I'll never cast this at level 3. I just don't have enough spells to cast it at level 3. But at higher levels, I will absolutely cast Mirror Image if I have a chance to prepare before combat, because it does take an action to cast. So if we're casting this in combat, it has to be instead of something else. Now, if I'm in a position where I'm a reasonable high level and I would be casting maybe a cantrip, I might choose Mirror Image instead, because a cantrip isn't that big a deal. Cantrips aren't where most of my damage is coming from. Then I get Pass Without Trace. Amazing, right? Pass Without Trace provides a plus 10 bonus to dexterity stealth checks for your entire party for an hour. Now it does use your concentration, which means you're not using guidance at the same time, but still, plus 10 bonus to dexterity stealth checks is huge, right? You're turning everyone in your party, guaranteed that they're going to be rolling 10 or higher, even if they have a -1 on their dexterity. Anyone who has an even dexterity, they're guaranteed an 11 or higher. Of course, this does combine with your Blessing of the Trickster. So if you have somebody maybe with disadvantage, you can take that disadvantage away, or boost whoever's the weakest in your party at stealth. Even us, even if we haven't been able to upgrade that scale mail yet, now at 3rd level we may have already gotten a breastplate. But if we haven't, if we're using Pass Without Trace and we have our +4 bonus, we're guaranteed a 15 or higher even with disadvantage, even if we roll a 1. So Pass Without Trace, huge. It turns your entire party into infiltrators. So now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be picking 2 more preparations. So at 2nd level, as I said, already got 2 great spells, but we're going to take an even better spell, and that's Spiritual Weapon. Spiritual Weapon is one of the best spells at 2nd level. It is an amazing combat spell because it is a bonus action casting, uses a bonus action every round. You're going to make an attack roll based on your wisdom, and you're going to be doing 1d8 plus your wisdom bonus in damage with this attack. So basically now we're getting 2 attacks a round, one with a cantrip, one with a spiritual weapon. This is at level 3, so your fighter is still attacking once a round. And this second attack is actually better than our cantrip attack. We will do more damage with a spiritual weapon than we will do with our cantrips. That means suddenly, whenever we use this, the bonus action becomes more important than the action. That is a significant thing. It doesn't last, right? As we go up in levels, spiritual weapon will become less significant. But at 3rd level, it is the most effective thing we can do. We may use both our 2nd level slots on spiritual weapon. I mean, we may want a slot for Pass Without Trace if we're doing exploring, but we may very well be using both our 2nd level spells and spiritual weapons. And for that reason, I don't really see the point in even taking another 2nd level spell, because those 2nd level spells are in such demand. We have such great options already. We're going to be using them up, no problem. So I'm going to go back to 1st level, And this might surprise you, but I am going to prepare Cure Wounds. And the reason I'm going to prepare Cure Wounds is this. It's a 1-action cast time. Strange as it sounds, the fact that Healing Word uses a bonus action is now a disadvantage. We actually have our bonus actions more valuable than our actions whenever a spiritual weapon is in play. That means that having a spell that uses an action to heal instead of a spell that uses a bonus action to heal is actually an advantage. Of course, also the Cure Wounds heals a little bit more as well. D8 plus our spellcasting ability modifier. It's not a huge deal, but you can expect to heal a couple extra points of damage, which is good. Now, the disadvantage here is that it has a range of touch. That means that you need to be able to get to that player if you want to cast a spell. If they're somewhere where you don't want to go, you may not want to be using this. So I'm going to keep Healing Word largely for that 60-foot range. Then I can just choose the best of both worlds. So I've made my picks. I'm all leveled up. Let's see what we look like. Okay, so the big difference is here, of course, we have more hit points. Naturally, nothing's really changed in terms of our abilities. Our proficiency bonus hasn't changed. What we do have now is Invoke Duplicity. So how am I going to use Invoke Duplicity? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably try to use it to provoke enemy attacks. If I have an enemy where I have allies in combat with it, I might try to hide and then invoke Duplicity and then have it pop up beside them, and maybe the enemy might throw a couple attacks that way. Also, then if the ally goes down, I could use the Invoke Duplicity to cast the Cure Wounds spell because it's right there to bring him back up again. And that prevents me from having to be able to get there or break, hide, that kind of thing. Now, because the Invoke Duplicity is the bonus action to move, I'm probably not going to want to move it very much because I'm going to have a spiritual weapon up as often as I can, at least, and that then is in conflict. So I'm probably going to cast that Invoke Duplicity somewhere close to the enemy, and then it's just going to stay there. And if there's a point where it's not useful to me anymore, well, then I might just dismiss it. But at this point, there's not a lot I'm going to be concentrating on. I can certainly use Bless, or I can use Invoke Duplicity. I basically can choose one of those two things. They're both reasonably good in different ways. And of course, as a cleric, I have Turn Undead. Turn Undead is the best thing you can do against undead. So whenever there is undead, screw Invoke Duplicity, use your Channel Divinity on the Turn Undead. Now, some campaigns you may not come up against undead, but undead are reasonably common. They come up a lot in a lot of campaigns, and when they do, it's really nice to have this because it doesn't care what kind of challenge rating they are. It doesn't care how many there are. Any undead within 30 feet of you save or they are frightened. That's really good. So let's look at our spells. As you can see, we now have 4 first level spells and 2 second level spells. So that's a big jump, right? We have 3 times as many spells as we had at first level and twice as many as we had at second level, by the way, which means that that's more blesses. That's more Healing Words. We can use Healing Word or Cure Wounds with a little more freedom. We don't have to worry as much about running out of spells. Second level, Pass Without Trace and Spiritual Weapon. Those are our big ones. If we need Pass Without Trace, we're going to cast it. If we don't need Pass Without Trace, then that's 2 spiritual weapons. If we have 2 fights, 2 spiritual weapons. Best thing you can do offensively. So generally what we're going to be doing in combat is on round 1. The very first thing we're going to do, spiritual weapon with our bonus action. Get the spiritual weapon going, you get an attack. Then the next thing you're going to do, an action on Toll the Dead. And then you get a second attack on that same character. It's not a technical attack. They make a saving throw or take damage, but you know what I mean. So essentially 2 methods of doing damage at level 3. Then on round 2, now that we have our spiritual weapon going, we have the option of doing things like Bless, which wouldn't have been an option on round 1. One thing we can do on round 1 is we can do our Invoke Duplicity, because the Invoke Duplicity is not a spell casting, so it doesn't compete with a spiritual weapon. So now that we are all done, we're going to go and level up to level 5. So here's what level 5 looks like. The big difference here is we have an ability score improvement. Guess what we're going to improve? We are going to improve our wisdom. If you are not playing a variant human, there is reason why you might want to take a feat that's going to help you with concentration. You can mitigate that to some degree with things like mirror image, with a good armor class, with just being careful in combat, hiding, all that kind of stuff. But you may want to consider a feat. I would say it's close because wisdom is so good that if you go wisdom, that's still a good choice. So let's go with spells. As you can see, we just have a ton of spells now, right? This is the advantage of playing a cleric. And we now have Blink and Dispel Magic. Blink is a good defensive spell, but it takes an action to set up. It's probably not as good a defensive spell, I think, as Mirror Image, though you can stack them. So if you have a chance to prep for combat and you really want to go heavy on the defense, for example, if you are not a variant human and you raise your wisdom and you want to avoid concentration saves, yes, you can stack your Mirror Image and your Blink, and you are going to be very difficult to target. Dispel Magic, of course, has its obvious use, which is if you want to get rid of a magical effect that hurt a fellow party member, you cast Dispel Magic and get rid of it, or somebody who's well buffed up, you cast Dispel Magic and you take down those buffs. Here's how Blink works. 1 action casting, 1 minute, it lasts, no concentration. Roll d20 at the end of each of your turns. On a roll of 11 or higher, you vanish from your current plane of existence and appear on the ethereal plane. Then at the start of your next turn, you return. So that basically means if you roll the 11 or higher, you can't be targeted by anything for a round. So it is basically the perfect defense when it works, which is about half the time. So you basically have a 50-50 chance every round of enemies not being able to target you. And that's pretty good. And the fact that it doesn't use concentration means it's stackable with other stuff. But it is an action to cast. So this isn't something that you necessarily want to cast in combat. But if you have a chance to prepare beforehand and you don't mind spending a third level spell to do it, you can combine your Blink and your Mirror Image. Now, I should mention at level 5, I would never use a level 3 slot on Blink. This is something I'm only going to be casting at higher levels. At level 5, there is only one spell I want to cast. So let's go into known spells. And you probably know which spell I'm talking about. I get to pick 3 more spells, and the very first one I'm obviously going to pick is Spirit Guardians. Spirit Guardians is huge. 1 action, self 10-minute duration, which is terrific. Does use your concentration. 15-foot radius around you. Any creatures you choose are taking 3d8 radiant damage. Now, if you're evil, then it would be necrotic damage, which is fine. Necrotic damage isn't that bad. Most things are not immune to necrotic damage. Even things you might think would be immune to necrotic damage usually aren't. But we're playing a good cleric, it would be radiant damage. Furthermore, we're making the speed of all those creatures halved in the area. So we're also exhibiting some control, and it's mass damage. All these things add together. Lovely spell. They make wisdom saving throws for half, so they're still taking damage even if they save. This is the spell you want to be casting. This is largely the reason you want to play a cleric, is for Spirit Guardians. It's the best blast in the game, and it scales amazingly. When you up it, you're getting an extra d8 for every slot above third every round. So if you think about a 4-round combat where you're using this, that's 4d8 for 1 spell slot. Now, because I'm going to be using so many of my spell slots on Spirit Guardians, and I'm only going to start with 2, right? Again, I want to look at rituals. Water Walk is a decent ritual. Water Walk lasts an hour, but you can target up to 10 willing creatures, and they get water walking for the duration. Honestly, if I can choose between Water Walk and Water Breathing, I like Water Breathing better, but Water Walk is a decent ritual to have when you can't choose Water Breathing, because you need some way to navigate that water, and if you don't have Water Breathing, Water Walk does the job. Another spell I'm going to pick is Revivify. Now, again, I want to use my slots on Spirit Guardians, but sometimes things happen, and an ally has died in combat. Well, if you have Revivify, you have 1 minute and you can bring them up. We're going to have to buy some diamonds, 300 gold pieces worth. You might want to have a couple so that you can cast a couple times. Ideally, we're never going to cast this spell, right? But we're going to have it prepared so that in the rare case where somebody does actually die, we can bring them back ourselves. And you can do it with a 3rd level spell. And of course, as a cleric, you're really the only one who's going to be able to do it at 5th level. So we have all our prepared spells done. Now we get to pick one more cantrip, and the cantrip I'm going to pick is Sacred Flame. There is a reason why I might consider Mending. Mending is a very good cantrip as well, but Sacred Flame just gives me that choice. I can now do Necrotic or Radiant depending on what I'm fighting. I can target a Wisdom save or a Dexterity save depending on what I'm fighting, so that gives me some nice choices. Now, if you're not using Xanathars, of course you took Sacred Flame at level 1, and you don't really have another option. But I think for this cleric, it's good to have both. So our character is all leveled up, so let's take a look. Now our proficiency bonus has also increased, so we're going to see some numbers look really good now. Insight +7, Perception +7, Passive Wisdom 17. These are great scores. As you can see, we still have Lucky for when we need it. The spells we've got 4 1st level slots, 3 2nd level slots, and 2 3rd level slots. Here's how combat works now. When we go into combat, round 1, Spirit Guardians. That's how we start a combat. Now you can't really do anything else, right? Because if you cast a spell with your action, you can't use a bonus action to cast a spell. We don't really have any other bonus actions, so this is where we start. We start with the Spirit Guardians. Then on round 2, we're going to do a spiritual weapon, and we're going to do Toll the Dead or any other single action we might want to do. You could do things like a hide or a help action too, but Toll the Dead now has scaled, which means it's going to be doing 2d12 instead of 1d12, or Sacred Flame for 2d8. Toll the Dead is better against something that's taken damage. If we hit the same thing we hit with a spiritual weapon, then we can make sure it's damaged when we hit it with the Toll the Dead. Then that is the combination. Each round, Spirit Guardians, 3d8 to everything around you. Then you're going to be doing your spiritual weapon, d8 plus Wisdom, which is now a +4. And your bonus to hit has gone up by +2 on the spiritual weapon, by the way, because your proficiency bonus and your Wisdom went up. And the damage on the spiritual weapon has gone up as well. So it's a really good one right now. D8 +4 damage. Great use of your bonus action every round, and then your action every round for Toll the Dead. So you're adding 3 different sources of damage. Any one of them not amazing on its own. Add all 3 together, and we're inflicting a significant amount of damage, enough to make us comparable with even martial classes in terms of damage. But it does require the 2-round setup, and you can only do it a certain number of times a day. Okay, so now that we are 5th level, let's jump up, and we're going to go to 7th level. Now this is a big level for a Trickery Cleric. And this is the point, I would say, where the Trickery Cleric and all other clerics, there is a noticeable difference in the power level. And this is where Trickery Clerics are really excelling. 7th level. This is the apex. If we look here at 4th level, we're going to see that this is what clerics can choose for spells at 4th level, minus the Dimension Door and the Polymorph. This isn't a great list. There are good spells on this list. I mean, Death Ward is there. It's an okay spell. Banishment is there. And Stone Shape is okay. Guardian of Faith, Freedom Movement. These aren't terrible spells, but they aren't great spells. And there's not a lot to choose from. But Dimension Door and Polymorph really stand out on this list as massively better, and massively better than any of the other subclasses for Cleric are going to get. If we look here, here's Dimension Door. 1 action casting. You can teleport yourself from your current location. You arrive at the spot desired, and you can take up to 1 creature with you. And you can go up to 500 feet. Now the point of a Dimension Door usually is a combat maneuver where you have an enemy and they are a real problem for a particular character, and you get them out of there, right? You're like that soldier who pulls out the wounded ally, that's the Dimension Door spell. There are, of course, utility uses for Dimension Door as well, but I find I like it especially as a retreat spell. If you need to get out of somewhere, it can get you out of there, and it can get somebody else out of there with you. Something to note about Dimension Door. If you are playing a small-sized character, you are limited to another character of your size or smaller, so you can't cast this and take, say, a human with you if you are a small-sized character. That's a significant disadvantage to playing a small-sized character. But this particular character is a human, so that won't be an issue. So the other spell, of course, we get is Polymorph. Now, lots of different classes get Polymorph, but clerics don't. And not getting it is a significant disadvantage for clerics. And like I said, you notice around 7th level the point where other casters start to overtake the cleric in terms of overall power, but not the Trickery Cleric, because Polymorph stays that off. 1 hour duration, 1 action cast. You turn an enemy into a creature of your choice or an ally into a creature of your choice up to its challenge rating. Now, that means you can turn an ally into a giant ape. This is the giant ape. Hit points 157. Multi-attack. +9 to hit on 2 fist attacks, each for 3d10 plus 6 damage. Somebody has mentioned to me that their party members don't want to be turned into giant apes or polymorphed at all because they like playing their characters and their abilities. Of course they do. That's why they made those characters. This isn't a round 1 spell. This is the fighter is going down this round spell. Because the fighter doesn't get to choose. That player doesn't get to choose to play that fighter and those abilities beyond that round because they're about to go down. What they're going to be able to do is play a giant ape or make death saves. So that seems to me to be a pretty easy choice to make. So we've got our Polymorph and Dimension Door. As I said, they're so much better than all these other spells that I cannot see taking my 2 additional prepared spells with 4th level slots. I'm only going to have 1 4th level slot, and I have 2 spells that are definitely going to be one of those 2 spells that I use with that slot. So there's no point preparing anything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back a couple levels. If we go to our 2nd level spells, you'll see there's Aid here. Aid is a nice buff spell. You pick 3 creatures. One of them can be you, and then maybe the 2 allies that are taking the most damage. Usually it's stuff like your barbarians and your fighters and your paladins. It lasts for 8 hours, raises their maximum hit points by 5. No concentration. Now 5 isn't a lot, but this scales just beautifully. If we use a 3rd level slot for this, then it's giving them double that, right? So now with a 3rd level slot, this is becoming pretty potent. And as we go up in levels, this might be something we scale more and more. We might look at using 4th or 5th level slots with this eventually. For now, I would say using it as a 2nd or 3rd level slot is just fine. The other spell I'm going to look at is Sanctuary. So let's just narrow this down. There's Sanctuary. This is a bonus action cast. At this point, actions, bonus actions, everything, they're all valuable now. We're not using our cantrips nearly as much with our actions by 7th level because we have a lot more slots. We'll go over slots on the character sheet, but basically we have 11 spell slots at this point, which means in a lot of adventuring days, we're not going to be doing a lot of cantrip actions. So it's not a big deal whether we're using bonus actions or regular actions for these kinds of spells. Either one is a sacrifice. Losing 1 attack with a spiritual weapon at level 7 isn't nearly as big a deal as losing an attack with a spiritual weapon at level 3. So I'm not too worried about this being a bonus action anymore. You ward a creature within range against attack until the spell ends. Any creature who targets the warded creature with an attack or harmful spell must first make a wisdom saving throw, and if they fail, they have to choose a different target. So this becomes a spell you use to protect somebody who is in trouble. If you have an ally who goes down, Sanctuary can be particularly useful if you have the DM who has that style, and we have played for DMs. I am playing tonight for a DM that uses the style where if a player goes down, you can bet the enemies are going to gang up on the down guy and finish him off. Sanctuary is a way to prevent that. You use a bonus action, you cast on them, the enemies go to finish them off. Now they can't. They have to choose a different creature. Depending on your DM style, Sanctuary may give you different results, but in certain situations, I think it is a very good choice, especially as a first level slot. So I'm going to go ahead and prepare that one as well. Not a lot of changes on the front because we're still looking at the same proficiency bonus we had before. 52 hit points, which is fine for the level. It's not great. It's not terrible. It's in the middle somewhere. We don't know what our armor class is going to be at this point. Probably higher than an 18, I would think. If we look at our features and traits, we're going to see that we can now use Channel Divinity twice per short rest. So that's actually quite a bit. If you take maybe 2 short rests in a day, that's 6 Channel Divinities you can use. That's Invoke Duplicities, Destroy, and Turn Undead, and it is your new Cloak of Shadows ability. The Cloak of Shadows ability allows you as an action to use your Channel Divinity to become invisible into the end of your next turn or until you attack or cast a spell. That means that things like Spirit Guardians that are already cast and aren't attacks will not break this invisibility. Now it's only a round, so when am I going to use Cloak of Shadows? I'm going to use it as a disengage. If some enemy comes up into melee and I'm concentrating maybe on a Spirit Guardians, I want to get out of that melee as fast as I can because I'm going to start taking a lot of damage. The Spirit Guardians is going to go down, and now I'm just fighting for my life. But Cloak of Shadows fixes that. It's better than a disengage because I'm going to use Cloak of Shadows. I can now disengage without provoking opportunity attacks, and I'm invisible till the end of my next turn, which means that a lot of spells can no longer target me, and attacks that target me are all going to be facing disadvantage. All really useful stuff, and if I've got a Spirit Guardians up, remember that the terrain is also difficult for the enemies, so if you move back from there, you can even make it hard for them to get to you for the next round. So a lot of people diss on Cloak of Shadows. I think it's reasonably good. It's not a powerhouse, but I'm definitely going to use it. Invoke Duplicity, I'm probably not using as much at this point because I'm using Spirit Guardians so much, but it is going to be something I'm going to maybe start using again reasonably soon. So let's go ahead and level this guy up to level 9. And the first thing that we see is we get our other ability score improvement that happened at level 8. We are definitely going to increase our wisdom, and that is going to get our wisdom up to that 20. So this is the point now where we've got our wisdom at maximum. So as ability score increases come up, we can start looking at feats. Now, as you can see, we've added 2 new spells, Dominate Person and Modify Memory. Dominate Person is a spell I'm not a big fan of, and I'm probably never going to cast it as a Trickery Cleric. Other people enjoy this spell more than I do, so if you do, this is what it does. It's an action. You can cast up to 60 feet. You pick a humanoid, and you can attempt to charm them, and then you can potentially control them. Because it's a single target, if they save, nothing happens. It's not the kind of spell I tend to like. I also tend not to like the fact that it's restricted to humanoids. Modify Memory is another matter. As a spy character, I can definitely see the use of a Modify Memory spell. This is not something I'm going to be using in combat, but outside of combat, this allows you to pick a creature and then you can change its memories, right? Obviously. And if you're playing a campaign where there's any kind of subterfuge, these kinds of things, you can, if somebody's witnessed something they shouldn't have witnessed, those kinds of things, you can fix it. And so I find this spell, it's not good for every kind of character, but for this kind of character, it's exactly the kind of spell I want to have. I'm not using it in combat. This is an out-of-combat spell, but out of combat, I'm glad to have it. So now I want to pick some combat spells. And at 5th level, there are a lot of good choices on a cleric. So I'm going to go ahead and pick 3 spells. I have 3 more prepared spells, and they're all going to be 5th level spells. The first one I'm going to pick is Greater Restoration. And until I have a second 5th level slot, I'm going to save my 5th level slot as much as I can, because Greater Restoration is something you want to have in reserve. As a cleric, this is a spell that you really should take. You're going to have to buy some diamond dust. It's worth 100 gold pieces. You're going to need it for every casting, so you might want a couple 100 gold pieces worth of it. You may not cast this spell a lot, but when you need it, you must have it. So what it does is it's a 1 action. you can reduce the target's exhaustion level by 1 or end one of the following effects on the target. One effect that charmed or petrified a target, one curse including a target's attunement to a cursed magic item, any reduction to one of the target's ability scores, and one effect reducing the target's hit point maximum. So there's 3 cases where this is just a must. The first is petrified. If a character becomes petrified, you need a greater restoration spell. They're not dead. You can't raise dead on them. You can't revivify them, but they're out until they get a greater restoration. And you're looking at after a long rest if this isn't prepared, or longer than that if it's not prepared and you don't have the diamond dust. So have your diamond dust, have your greater restoration ready. Should somebody become petrified, you will need this. The other thing that can come up is there's certain cases where if somebody falls to a 0 on an ability score, that can put them completely out of the action. Then you must have a greater restoration to bring them back. Again, you can't raise them, none of those things. Greater restoration is what you need. The final thing is the effects that reduce hit point maximums, because there are undead that have attacks, and if they hit you, you take damage, and then your hit points are reduced by the amount of the damage, and your maximum is reduced by the amount of the damage. So if you fall to a maximum hit points of 0, you're done until you get a greater restoration. So again, a spell you must have prepared. Not necessarily a spell you need, but for the circumstances where it's needed, it is essential. The second spell I'm going to grab is Scrying. Now this is a little bit indulgent because I'm playing a spy type character, and Scrying of course is a great spy type spell. I'm going to need a focus worth at least 1,000 gold pieces. I might already have that. If I'm using a magic shield and it's got an emblem on it, I might already have my focus worth 1,000 gold pieces. If not, you're going to need to buy one. Now, because it does not get consumed when the spell is cast, it's a one-time purchase. Pick a creature, then you can spy on it, and you can see where it is and what it's saying and what's going on around it. This is useful for spying. This is useful in rescue attempts. This can be useful just to find somebody who's missing. Lots of uses for scrying spells inside and outside of spying. The final spell I'm going to take is Contagion. Contagion is not a spell I'm probably going to be using at level 9, but it is a spell I'll be looking at using at higher levels. If you have not read Contagion since the latest errata, it is very different than it might look in your player's handbook. This is the most current version of Contagion. It's 1 action to cast, touch spell, lasts for 7 days. It's really going to last probably for 3 to 5 rounds. You touch inflicts disease. Make a melee spell attack against a creature within your reach. On a hit, the target is poisoned. No saving throw. So this means the red dragon comes down, breathes on your party, you're all in bad shape. It lands, it starts attacking you. You hit it with Contagion, and you've screwed it until it gets its breath weapon back. There's not much it can do. They'll have tons of attacks, tons of legendary attacks, and all of those would have disadvantage. Furthermore, because they don't get a saving throw against this effect, their legendary resistance doesn't help them. Their great saving throws don't help them. Now, at the end of each of their turns, they can make a Constitution saving throw. If they succeed on 3 of these saves, the target's no longer poisoned and the spell ends. So, if it makes 3 Constitution saving throws in a row, this lasts for 3 rounds. And then, assuming they don't make 3 in a row, it will last longer than that. Now, they have to fail 3 Constitution saves for it to have that 7-day duration. I wouldn't count on that happening. This is like a short-term, significant debuff on something that relies on attack rolls. That's when it's really useful. Now, the big limitation of a Contagion is if you miss, it does nothing. You must hit on your attack. This is, again, where Invoke Duplicity suddenly becomes interesting again, because Invoke Duplicity can provide you advantage on a melee attack. So you can use your Invoke Duplicity to give you advantage on the Contagion, which might be an all or nothing kind of scenario. So having advantage on that roll is a big deal. So that's level 9. I should mention now that if we look at this list of prepared spells, there are 28 prepared spells at this level. That is massive. Clerics at level 9 just have a crazy amount of spells. Now their level 4 spells aren't looking quite as good. Even some of the level 5 spells maybe not as good as other classes. We mitigate that by taking a Trickery Cleric. Dimension Door is still a huge powerhouse at this level. Polymorph is still a huge powerhouse at this level. So we have mitigated that by taking a Trickery Cleric. This is the point where a Cleric just has more spells significantly than anybody else. It's kind of their apex. It tends to be the point where now, as we move on, all the Cleric subclasses are picking from the exact same list. There's no more domain spells. So we're going to see them all become more and more alike as we level up. So the difference between the Trickery Cleric and all the other Clerics diminishes at this point. Some cases there's capstones like the Arcana Cleric that are amazing enough that at 17th level that changes, but in most cases that's not the case. So if we look at a character sheet, we're looking pretty good at this point. 66 hit points. We've got our +9 on perception, and we have our actions in combat. The Blessing of the Trickster we're using all the time. Cloak of Shadows as a disengage. Invoke Duplicity maybe to deliver Contagion. I'm probably not doing it at level 9, but as I get more 5th level slots, it's certainly an option. Turn Undead, and then of course spells. We have lots of spells at this point. 4 1st level slots, 3 2nd level slots, 3 3rd level slots, 3 4th level slots, and a 5th level slot. So that's 14 slots. And the 3 4th level slots is a big deal. That means polymorphs and dimension doors without worrying. You can do them multiple times. You don't have to worry because you cast dimension door that you're not going to be able to do a polymorph later. So this is a really nice place to be. 9th level is a strong position for this particular character. We're going to jump now right to level 12. And we're going to increase our rate of this character here. Let's get it up to level 20. There's less choices at this point, so it's a little easier to do. So we've got an ability score improvement. Now I'm going to choose a feat now. And I mentioned this early in the build. We are going to go ahead and we are going to take Resilient Constitution. Resilient Constitution is going to give me proficiency bonus in my Constitution saving throws. We are at a level where the proficiency bonus is significant, so that is a good choice at this level. Now let's look at our spells. We now have 6 level spells, and it looks like we get 1 more cantrip and 3 more prepared spells. So we'll start with a cantrip. I'm not using a lot of cantrips at this point, but I can certainly see using cantrips for utility purposes. That's why I think Mending is a good choice at this point. Now if we go to our 6th level spells, the very first spell I'm going to take without even thinking about it is Heal. Heal is a standout for clerics. It heals 70 hit points of damage to one character within 60 feet. That's a lot of hit points for one action. Makes a big deal on the battlefield, and it's a really good choice for a cleric of this level. I'm also going to take Word of Recall. What Word of Recall does is it allows you to bring up to 5 willing creatures to teleport to a spot you designated when you prepared your sanctuary. So that means it's like a long-range teleport back to like a home base. So this can be used as a group runaway if you are in trouble, or if you are in the middle of a dungeon and you're just not able to get your rests and you're in trouble. Word of Recall can bring you back somewhere safe. Or it could just be traveling because you've traveled across the world and now it's time to go back and you can just get there. So a number of uses for this, combat-wise, dungeon-wise, utility-wise, useful spell. And then I'm going to take Blade Barrier. Blade Barrier is kind of a wall. It's not a great wall. Clerics aren't good at casting wall spells. This is as close as we're going to get. You create a vertical wall of whirling razor-sharp blades made of magical energy. They're a reasonable size. You can put them in a ring around the party, which is useful. They provide 3/4 cover to creatures behind it, can give you protection against range attacks or range attack spells, and its space is difficult terrain, which slows movement. So it's not a true wall because creatures can move through it. However, if they do move through it, then they take damage. It's okay. When you need a wall spell, this is better than nothing. So if we take a quick look at our character, not a lot of huge changes. One thing I'm just going to note here is that when it comes to spells now, we just have a ton of spells, right? We are at the level of spellcasting. 4 first level slots, 3 second level slots, 3 third level slots, 3 fourth level slots, 2 fifth level slots, and a 6th level slot. We are not casting a lot of cantrips in combat anymore. If you have a weapon, you're probably not swinging it very much anymore. So when I talked about in the first part of this video about Divine Strike and about potent spell casting, this is what I meant. We have so many spells now. We are just not using those other spells very much. Certainly not when it's important. Against like the easy creatures or the easy fights, we still probably are using it once in a while, but those aren't the fights where it really makes a difference whether we are getting every point of damage possible. One thing to note on this page is if we look at our saving throws, our Constitution saving throw just jumped to +6 thanks to that Resilient. That's a significant boost. Remember, we still have Lucky if we need it. Remember, we can still use things like Mirror Image to reduce the number of hits we take, or even Invoke Duplicity to reduce the number of hits we take, and things like Cloak of Shadows to reduce the number of attacks we take. So we have a lot of different ways to reduce the amount of concentration saves we have to make, but when we do make them now, we have a much improved chance of succeeding. For a cleric, this is very important, and we are in pretty good shape. We've taken care of ourselves on that regard. We didn't bother with Warcaster, but because we took other things thoughtful of concentration saves, we're still well padded there. I'm going to jump right to level 16. Let's note we get another ability score improvement. Again, I'm inclined to take a feat. Now there's a number of things I could do here. If there was a really good feat that gave me a +1 Constitution and something else, I'd probably pick it at this point. There really isn't a lot of great choices for that though. As we go through, we're not seeing a lot of Constitution boosts that are good for humans and are really going to help us out. So instead, what we'll do is I'm going to go ahead and take Tough. Tough is going to be a feat that will just give us a lot of hit points at this level. It is one of those feats that is good at high levels as well as low levels. What it does is it's providing 2 extra hit points per level. And as you can see, we are now going to be selecting both 7th and 8th level spells because we've done a significant jump in levels. We also have 4 prepared spells to choose. So let's look at our 7th and our 8th level spells. At 7th level, we've got Conjure Celestial, which I think is decent. What you want to do with Conjure Celestial is you want to summon a Coatl. That is the choice. No other Celestial that in any of the current books is very good, but Coatl is very good. Plane Shift and Etherealness, also both good choices. Resurrection is a kind of spell that I might cast occasionally, but I'm not going to prepare it because it's going to be the kind of spell that I might cast on something that's been dead for a while. It can wait one more day. So looking at our 8th level slots, you can see there are very, very few options. 4 choices. Again, as I said, subclass doesn't really matter at this point. All the clerics start to look more alike because there's so few spells to choose from. There's no domain spells, so we're all kind of taking the same spells. Now there's a few decent options here. I would skip Control Weather, Earthquake, Holy Aura, Anti-Magic Field are all okay. I am going to take Anti-Magic Field. Anti-Magic Field is kind of your nuke spell. You move up to an enemy spellcaster when you have an Anti-Magic Field up, and you are taking them out and you're taking yourself out. Then allies can maybe take them out with ranged attacks or with melee attacks with non-magical weapons. So if you're fighting something like high-level casters, this is kind of just a way to take them out. Not a spell I cast lightly. Then I'm going to make 3 selections from my 7th level spells because there are 3 good choices here. Conjure Celestial, as I said, reasonable choice. Plane Shift is a reasonable spell. Also, it can be used to get the entire party out. It can be used to travel. You can use it to access teleportation circles. So if you don't have a teleporting character in your party, this is a way around that. The other one I am going to take is Etherealness. So just a quick look at these spells. Here's Conjure Celestial, 1 hour duration is very nice. Does use your concentration. You summon a Celestial Challenge rating 4 or lower. Summon a Coatl, as I mentioned. Ethereal is a good spell. You can just turn yourself ethereal. You become invisible. You can walk through walls. There's a lot of spells that we can say are the ultimate scouting spell. This is another one we could say is the ultimate scouting spell. It's a very good scouting spell. It's also a very good spying spell. And it is a good walk through the dungeon, find out what's there. Nothing can hurt you. Nothing can see you. You can get right to the end and get drops on creatures. So lots of useful things you can do with the Etherealness spell. In Plane Shift, as I said, you can take up to 8 willing creatures, so that's easily your whole party. You can go to other planes. You can go to Teleportation Circle. So 2 castings of this could take you to another plane's Teleportation Circle and then back to your own plane to a different Teleportation Circle. So it's a way to kind of duplicate a Teleportation Circle spell if nobody else has it in your party. So let's look at our character sheet. As we can see, we've added those 32 hit points, so we now have 147 hit points. That's quite a bit for this level. We're going to be having hit points now comparable to what you might see in a martial class. 147 hit points, so that 32 hit points, if we look at it, it's doing close to 30% increase. That is a significant increase on our hit points. So let's do it. Let's go right to 20th level. So I'm going to pop that up to 20th. So we get an ability score improvement. So we are at the point now where we've really taken all the best stuff. We have mitigated our concentration saves. We boosted our hit points. Our wisdom is at 20. Each time you get an ability score improvement, you get a little bit less than the time before. We are at that point where we're not having a lot of amazing choices here. I'm going to go ahead and take Alert. Alert is one that will give us a +5 to initiative. We can't be surprised, and creatures that are attacking us from hidden aren't getting an advantage on their attack rolls. All useful stuff. This isn't hugely powerful, but it is still useful and going to make a difference in our character. And we have 4 spells to add. I'm going to jump to level 9. And we don't have very many options. 4 options. Astral Projection, Gate, Mass Heal, and True Resurrection. Another thing to note is a lot of these spells require costly components. If we look at Astral Projection, we have 1,100 gold pieces worth of spell components that are consumed. If we look at Gate, we have a diamond worth at least 5,000 gold pieces required. If we look at True Resurrection, we have 25,000 gold pieces worth of diamonds, which are consumed. The only spell we can choose that doesn't have a costly component is Mass Heal. Fortunately, Mass Heal is a great spell, restoring up to 700 hit points, divided as we want, so it's a pool. Really good spell. I talked about this in my 9th level spells video. Definitely going to be the one I prepare at 9th level. And because of those other things, I'm not huge on these other spells. I'm going to go ahead and put up Astral Projection because it is a spell that might be useful in certain situations. I still have 2 additional spell slots to prepare. I'm going to go to 4th level, all the way back to 4th level, take my Death Ward. Now I can definitely afford those slots for Death Ward. And I could have taken it. I probably wouldn't wait till level 20. I'm probably taking it level 17 or 18. It's one of those spells that's pretty useful to have up. 4th level is a high level for that effect, but we are at a level where that 4th level slot isn't such a big deal anymore. I mean, we're not using Polymorph anymore. We still might use Dimension Door once in a while, but it's not a big spell for us anymore. The other one I'm going to take is Freedom of Movement. Again, exact same thing. So let's take a look at these 2. Death Ward, what happens is if you would drop to 0 hit points, instead you drop to 1 hit point and the spell ends. So it's like that half-orc ability. It lasts for 8 hours. Reasonably useful spell. Definitely once we have lots of spell slots, we can afford to cast it. Freedom of Movement is one of those spells. We only use it when we need it, which isn't very often, but once in a while. Lasts an hour, doesn't require concentration, unaffected by difficult terrain, and spells and other magical effects can neither reduce your speed nor cause you to be paralyzed or restrained. Obviously, paralyzed is terrible. Anything that could paralyze you, Freedom of Movement totally negates that. So we picked all our spells. This is our 20th level character. Let's take a look at him. As you can see, not a lot of dramatic stuff happened at the higher levels. The dramatic stuff for this cleric all happened levels 1 through 9. That is pretty common for clerics. That is because those spells from levels 10 and up just don't pack quite the same punch that you might see on a wizard or a sorcerer. Bards suffer the same issues as clerics at these high levels, but we have some great spells still. This is how many spells we have, just a million spells. 4 first level slots, 3 second level slots, 3 third level slots, 3 fourth level slots, 3 fifth level slots, 2 sixth level slots, 2 seventh level slots, an 8th and a 9th. So lots of spells. We can cast spells pretty much every round of one level or another. As we can see, our perception has ended up at plus 11. Really good. We now have passive perception of 21. Of course, we can't be surprised. We have the plus 7 initiative, 183 hit points, which is perfectly respectable for this level. Naturally, our armor class is not going to be 18 at this point. Plus 8 stealth is fine. We still have lucky. That's still useful for us. Blessing of the Trickster, we're still using that, right? Right from level 1 through 20, we're still using Blessing of the Trickster. Cloak of Shadows as a disengage. Invoke Duplicity is now improved. We do 4 at a time. Am I going to use that much? No. No. It's not as good as our good spells. I might use it in nothing combats, but the big combats, Invoke Duplicity, don't go near it anymore. It's too late, right? Turn Undead is still useful because some undead are really powerful, and Turn Undead is always good against them. Divine Intervention, of course, comes up. I forgot to mention that when it did come up. It is one of the things, it's an action. You roll your percentile dice, and if you roll your level or lower, your deity will directly intervene. Not something I ever do in combat, but out of combat, it is something you could try once a day, and there's no cost to do it. You can use it once, so you might as well try. So this is our character. We're all done to 20th level. That's a Trickery Cleric. That's how I would build a Trickery Cleric from level 1 through 20. What would you do differently? Let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you guys. Wow, that was a lot of work. Doing these class guides, more work than I thought, but fun. This second part again, probably what you're going to see in the entirety of future subclass videos, because I don't think I need to defend those other subclasses as much as I did the Trickery Cleric. Okay, guys, I am going to sit back. Oh, I need to relax, and I'm going to have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you next time with the Valor Bard.